Hi there. So today I'm really excited about this unit, really excited about the item I have here. Inside the box here is a Uni-T 260B thermal imaging camera. And I've ordered this from Uni-T, from their factory store through AliExpress. And I really want to get into the box here and put this unit through its paces. The thermal imaging camera is something that I've always seen, and it's something that just strikes me as a really kind of cool thing to have. I've purchased this item with my own funds, kind of a little bit of a gift to myself, because I've done some temperature tests on some equipment, some audio equipment the last time. It's really difficult when using one of those sort of infrared thermal sensors to know exactly what it's sensing and where the temperature areas are. And I thought, a thermal camera like this, where you can really see what's going on and get a better picture of what's going on, would be a very useful thing to have for doing that sort of analysis. And it just strikes me that there are a lot of things, everyday sorts of issues, wondering about thermal areas and things like that, where a thermal camera would come in handy. Before I get started, I just want to mention, if you find this video to be interesting, useful, helpful, please give it a thumbs up, or better yet, please subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate questions and comments. I've been getting a lot of interesting questions from viewers on the channel lately, things that I might not have thought of when I was doing my initial review and evaluation. And as long as I still have the item in my possession, I'll do my best to answer any kinds of questions that you might have about the items that I evaluate. Let's get into the box. And there's sort of all of these items that come from China come extremely well wrapped, I've found. And this one's no exception. They seem to wrap it with a lot of tape on the outside. So clearly there's no lack of willingness to put tape on these boxes, because they've put tape around everything. There's not a shred of the envelope visible. Well, maybe there's a shred visible somewhere here or there, but generally very little visible. And we can see here, as we get this out of the plastic envelope, very nice. There's another layer of foam here. Cut that open. And Uni-T Pro. And so you may or may not know, Uni-T has a couple of different lines. There's sort of a generalist line, or maybe we call that a hobbyist line. And then they have a higher end line of units with more certifications, better calibration, better electronics, and that's the Pro line. And those items do tend to cost a little more because there's a little more involved in the design and manufacture process for those items. So this one is, there it says, the UTi260B. That's exactly what I ordered. And if we look at the back here, the UTi260B is the settings here. And so this can measure from minus 20 degrees Celsius to 550, a certain accuracy for temperature greater than or equal to minus 10 degrees Celsius accuracy, plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius, or plus or minus 2%, whichever is greater. That's a good escape clause. The sensor, this is their highest resolution sensor at 256 by 192. There's no buzzer alarm, but there are a lot of other features. Now, frame rate is also very good here. This is generally operating at 25 hertz, so 25 updates a second. It has an integrated digital camera, so we can, as you'll see, we can overlay the digital regular image with the thermal image, and the images can be blended. Real-time image transmission, I think that might be through some sort of different connection. Logs of the high and low temperature, we'll look at that. Region of interest, we can have 3 measurement points. We have a field of view, and if we come across here, the field of view is 56 degrees, that's horizontal, by 42 degrees vertical field of view. There's another specification called IFOV. That's not infrared FOV, which is what I thought originally. It's the instantaneous field of view, and this is a bit of a mouthful. It is the angle subtended by a single pixel. So in a sense, it's the spatial resolution of a single pixel, and for this model, it's 3.8 milliradians. Okay, so radians is a standardized measure of angles. And then the last specification here on the box is thermal sensitivity, and if we come across, it is less than 50 millikelvins. And if we look up millikelvins and this thermal sensitivity, less than 50 millikelvins is a pretty good thermal sensitivity in the scheme of things for thermal imagers. The one thing that's confusing is that when we look at the specifications for the model in the manual, the thermal sensitivity in the manual, if you can see it here, is given as less than 60 millikelvins. And so that's a little confusing. The millikelvin rating tells us what the smallest thermal difference is that the thermal sensor can pick up. And so a smaller difference being picked up by the sensor is, of course, better. And so having a 50 millikelvin sensitivity is better than a 60 millikelvin sensitivity. So that's a little bit of a puzzle. And then a few other things, just more general kinds of ratings on the unit, like use of SD cards, the overall operating environment, voltage, and things like that. Now let's get into the box. Okay, good padding here. So we've got an instruction manual, and the instruction manual is all in English. So 20 pages, fully English instruction manual. That's nice. Guide here for downloading documents from the Uni-T website. That will be handy. It comes here with a little SD card. So that's a 32 gig SD card. And I can't make out the class there exactly. I'll put that in the video overlay. I'll probably need a magnifying glass to read that. Then we have a USB-A to USB-C charging cord. So this item has I believe, a rechargeable battery. And the camera itself, and that's everything that's in the box. It's nice of them to include the SD card. And so we can see here that this unit, although it comes to us directly from China, it has received certification from ETL Intertech that is valid both in Canada, the C here, and the US. So very nice. And it tells us what the temperature range is here. And at the bottom, we have a standard 1/4-inch tripod mount, so we can mount this on a tripod for use, although it can also be used in a handheld mode. At the top here, we have a spot where we can plug in the micro SD card and the USB-C cable for charging, and that's one of the first things that I'm going to do actually is charge it up. The trigger is over here. We'll see exactly how that trigger works in a few minutes. And then we've kind of got the various cameras here, the digital camera, the thermal imaging camera, and I think those are probably some lights. On the, I don't know whether to call this the back or the front, but on this side, we've got a power button, a play button, so that might be for recording segments of video, flashlight on and off, sort of a cursor control keypad with a set button in the middle, and a a back or a return button. And so those are the controls that we have on the front. And then we have, of course, the large area for the display. Now, what you can't tell from the video is the feeling of this unit. And so it's sort of a rubberized feel. So it's not a hard plastic. It's a soft, rubbery external material, although it's a fairly firm, hard, rubbery material. So that should protect it reasonably well if you were to drop it. Uh, the uh, the darker areas, these gray areas here, these are a hard plastic. You can tell. Maybe if I tap it with something, so you can hear that. You can hear that. So different kinds of material in the construction. And I think that's everything to see on the outside. And so before turning it on for the first time, I'm just going to plug it into charge. And let's see if this charges with a USB-C power delivery adapter as opposed to using that USB-A to USB-C cord. So I've plugged that in. I'm not sure where it would tell me that it's charging. That power adapter is on. So now with the USB-A to USB-C cord, when we plug that in, now we can see a symbol here that shows that it's charging. So what does that mean? It means that the unit, as sophisticated as it is, doesn't understand how to negotiate the power delivery settings with a power delivery based adapter. So that's not a big deal, but it is a little bit of a disappointment for me just because as the world overall moves towards USB-C, it seems to me a bit of a poor crutch that there are these USB-C to USB-A, or I should say USB-A to USB-C cords, so that we can charge these items through the USB-C port, but they may as well have been micro USB ports like we used to operate, because we still need to have a USB-A output at the other end in order to charge here. So I really do wish that everyone would sort of just move along so that we could have cords that are USB-C at both ends and plug them into USB-C based power delivery adapters. But that's just a little bit of a rant from me. These cords are plentiful, the adapters are plentiful, not a big deal. In fact, like I said, a cord, this one in particular, came in the box. But I really would like to see the world move over to having the devices all use proper power delivery adapters rather than just putting a USB-C connector here and using it as though it's a standard micro USB connector from 10 years ago. Here's what the display looks like once the unit's fully charged. You can see that the green bars aren't moving anymore. And at this point, we can remove the charge cable. And of course, now that display goes away. It's probably a good time to also insert the SD card that came along with the unit. So here's the SD card that came with the unit, and we'll just flip it over so that the pins are facing us, because that's the orientation that it wants to be in. And we just slot it in till it clicks, and so now that's in, and now we can close the cover. Okay, all in place. And I'd love to say that I'm powering it up for the very first time. It's not the very first time. There's not much difference though. So we can see that the unit shows us the Uni-T logo, and then it takes a little bit of time to initialize. We'll get a little bit of a progress bar at the bottom once it starts loading. And there we are, 100%. And then we go into operating mode. And so this is operating now, and I will start to go through some of the settings here on the screen. But the only difference between this first launch or this power up, and the very first power up is at the very first time it's powered up, it asks what language we want to use, and then it proceeds into the screen. And the choices for language are English and Chinese. So there's not a lot of flexibility here. I just want to go through, and there's quite a lot of functionality in the unit, and I want to be able to go through the functionality. And so I'm going to set it down, and I'm going to zoom in on the display. The display is all visible, and the controls are all visible in the frame now. We have the light here turns on a pair of lights at the front. So that's basically just a simple flashlight. And I think I've turned them on. You can see the lights are on there. And I guess if it's dark where you are, that's probably helpful. I've turned them off again. Most of the rest of the functionality is accessed through the directional pad here and the set button. Before I get into that, there's a few things to point out on the display. In order to better understand what's going on, I've got a glass of hot water here. This was boiling water when I poured it a minute or two ago. And so I just want us to now use that in order to get a sense of how the system works. So by default, when the unit first comes on, ooh, you can see that's pretty cool with the water there. You can see the display. Let's bring that up. The display has a red crosshair, and that's kind of dancing around in the hot water. And there's a green crosshair over here. The red crosshair in this mode shows the hottest spot in the frame, and the green crosshair shows the coolest spot in the frame. And the rest of the image and the color map is the full range is shown on the right-hand side, and the rest of the map is scaled between those 2 points. So between the coolest point and the hottest point in the frame, we get that scaling. And so now let's look at the settings that are available to us, the features that are available to us. If we press set, we have a few measurement modes that are available. We can go into there, and you can see that the default mode is called high-low spot. So that's what those two crosshairs, the red one and the green one, are. There's a center spot that we can also turn on, and these will work at the same time. And so now we have a center spot that we can kind of point around, and the value of that center spot is being shown here in the top left corner. And so you can see that where I have the center spot right now is pretty close to the red crosshair. And so they're reading pretty close to the same thing. Let's close that. But if I move so that the center spot is pointing off away from the hot water, now it's dropped and it's saying the center spot is 29 degrees Celsius. And as I get further and further away, that temperature drops off. The ambient room temperature here is probably about 20 something degrees. So that's what we have for center spot and high-low. And then there's a third category here. This is called region of interest. And if I turn that on, that's going to turn off the other settings. And what that does is in region of interest mode, there's a crosshair, and that crosshair is like the red crosshair we had before, except it's limited to a smaller frame. And so rather than having that red crosshair, in a sense, kind of get lost maybe on us inside the big frame, that region of interest now will stick within, or that crosshair will stick within that green boundary for the region of interest. And so right now it's pointing at the hot water, but if I move this over here, you can see that the the red crosshair is still staying there. And of course, the warmest area is close to where the hot water is. And so that's why it's sticking to the right edge uh, of the frame, but it's not jumping out of the frame to where you can kind of see the warmth of the water on the edge, but outside the frame. And the temperature of that crosshair is also being reflected in the upper left corner, whatever it is. And so now let's go back to measurement mode. We can see that region of interest was turned on, and that turned off the other two settings. There's no green dot beside them. So if I turn this off, they're all off now. I'm not exactly sure what it's showing now. I think it's showing me the hottest point in the frame, but I'm not exactly sure where that is because I don't have anything else turned on. So I tend to like this high-low spot feature, and so I'm going to turn that back on. So we're back to high-low. Palette, this is used to select from one of a number of different false coloring palettes. So we have a hot point in the frame and a cool point in the frame, and then there's a color scale that gets used to sort of provide a false coloring between all those different temperature settings. And so the settings available to us, these are the ones that are built in that we can choose from. There's one here called iron. We can go to another one called rainbow, slightly different effect there. There's one called white hot. So this is a grayscale palette that runs between black and white. So this is called red hot, slightly different than the default that started beginning, which was called iron. So that's red hot. Black hot. Okay, so now the hot points are black. So instead of running from black to white, this runs from white to black. So the cool spots are white. We have something called lava. That's very similar to iron, but just a little bit different. It drops off the colors so the cooler areas appear black. And then something that's called rainbow probably is used to kind of generate more contrast banding between different temperature areas. So you get more definite edges between the different temperature zones. So you can see sort of zones with similar temperatures. So if I choose rainbow, you can see that the zones, let's say, we'll use a fancy term, the isothermal curves appear with similar colors. And so the colors allow us to see, or this rainbow setting allows us to see areas where the temperature is relatively the same in similar colors. Now I'm going to go back to the default one, which was called iron. Then we have a point temperature feature. So this is kind of cool. It allows us to put a few different markers on the frame where we want to see the temperature. So there's 3 available. That's all there is. So the way that these points work, we have to be very attentive to how this works. When we first turn on a point, you can see that the label of the point, we have the label of 1 there, and it's in green at the present time. And then there's a temperature reading for what's at that point. And so we can, if we move it down here, it's still green, but the temperature reading is much hotter. But what this does is it allows us to put a marker somewhere on the frame, and we can move it around by using these keys. Now, we have to kind of hold the direction buttons down to get it to move. So you can see that moves it across. I can move it up. I can move it to the left. And then when I get it in the spot where I want it, I press set, and the number changes from green to white. And now that's going to stay as a point in the frame that it's going to show me the temperature for. So right now, of course, it's showing me a cool area. if I move it down, it stays at the same location in the frame, but it's showing me the temperature in the frame at that point now. And it's probably a little bit hard to see, but it's currently showing that the hot area for the liquid is about 57 degrees. Now I can turn on up to 3 of these points. So if I go back into the point temperature menu and bring it up, I can bring up a second point. The number there is currently green, so I can move that around and move that up. Now I have 2 points. And so if there's some points in the frame that I really want to monitor, I can set up to 3 of these points. And so there's 3 points now that are going to stay fixed in the frame to allow me to monitor the temperature at those 3 different locations. The next thing we want to look at here is what's called image mode. And so this is very cool. This is a feature that's a particular strength of the 260B model. And if I bring that up, you can see that the mode that's currently active is the one that we've been using so far, which is called thermal mode. And so that's just showing us the thermal camera. I can switch to digital camera mode. And so now it's just operating like a standard digital camera, showing me whatever I'm pointing the unit at. There's a fusion mode, which is very cool. And so that fuses the thermal image with the digital camera. And it's not too laggy. It's pretty good. And so it's a little fuzzy with the thermal camera because, of course, when we're seeing both of them overlaid together, the resolution of the thermal camera is a lot lower, and so it appears fuzzy compared to the digital camera. But really what this is intended to allow us to do, it's allow us to identify exactly the thing that we're seeing and where those hot spots or cold spots are, which is a lot easier because of the higher resolution of the digital camera. Now we can then go to what's called picture-in-picture mode. And so that gives us a small inset that was like the region of interest that we had. So that helps us localize, but we don't have that blending between the two. And so we have an inset with the thermal camera and then the digital camera around there. So that's another way of helping to localize or determine exactly what we're looking at in the thermal camera. And then we have an alignment mode. If I need to align the thermal camera and the digital camera, so right now it's showing at 1.0, I can kind of shift those around, and I really am going to undo that because everything was aligned just fine before. So that's the default. I'm just going to leave it at the default setting that it had. The last item here is for settings. And so there are a lot of settings here. Let's quickly run through what they are. I think they'll be pretty obvious. Language. Okay, we can choose between English and Chinese. Date and time. That will be useful for doing the image captures we'll talk about in a minute. Temperature units, Celsius and Fahrenheit. A little surprising that they don't have a Kelvin setting, which would be easy. There's a high-low alert setting, and so that allows us to set some alarms when the temperature in an area falls below a certain threshold or above a certain threshold. So I don't have anything over 130 Celsius, but let's turn that on for the low, and we'll see what that does. When we go back, the temperature scale, we have a high gain temperature scale and a low gain temperature scale. I'm not going to change these right now because it takes about half a minute to recalibrate when you change them. And The difference is in terms of the sensitivity of the unit. And so we're currently operating in high gain, and I think most of the time we would want to operate in high gain. Display brightness, we can choose between 3 levels. Auto power off mode, so we can have settings for how long we want the unit to run before we turn it off, and that 30 minutes is the default. There's the USB mode, and so one of the things that we can do is we can connect the USB that's up here. We can connect that to a computer, and there are 2 options here for the USB mode. One is that it will send still frames through to the computer application. The other is that it will send a continuous video stream through to the computer application. And so this is used to select which of those 2 should be sent out over the USB line. Measurements. So we can adjust the emissivity we can adjust the emissivity of the sensor based on the different kinds of materials that are predominantly in the environment, because different materials radiate heat in different fashion to the thermal camera. We can set the ambient temperature, so the ambient temperature is based on an internal sensor, and so we could use that to calibrate the ambient temperature. And we can set the distance. And then last item here is some system settings. There's device information that we can get, the model number, serial number, version, and the capacity on the SD card. We can do a factory reset. We can format the SD card, and we can set it up to auto-save images from onto the SD card at different points in time. So I'm just going to format the SD card just because we've just newly inserted that. So it goes into the formatting operation, and I hope that doesn't take too long. Okay, so that's done. And so then if we exit here, I now have, because the lowest temperature in the frame is below 20 Celsius, you can now see that the low temperature alert is being displayed there. Okay, and so that was pretty much what we asked it to do. Took me a little bit by surprise, but now let's go and turn that off. So back into settings, high-low alert. We'll turn off the low temperature alert. And now that alarm setting is gone. One of the things we can do here is we can take a picture of what we're getting by pressing the trigger. And so that captures something and saves it to the SD card. But we have to confirm that that's what we want to save. So we have to go over to the check mark and confirm that. So that's been saved to the SD card. There's a little bit of animation there. Let's do another capture here a little closer. Whoops. No, that's not what I want to do. Another capture a little closer. And so that's been saved. And so now that we've got a couple of images saved, that takes us to what this blue play button is for. If I press that, it shows me on the screen the images that I've saved. And so the thermal imager camera only has the ability to do screen snapshots, if you will, or images. It doesn't have the ability to save a video. So you can't sort of scan over an area and record a video for that. You can only do single frames. And of course, that back button takes us out. Now, I'm not sure how many frames in practice I would be capturing. The instructions say that when you get to 1,000 frames on the SD card, you might want to think about cleaning it up, because the images will tend to slow down the performance of the unit over time if you have a lot of frames captured. So I can't imagine having that many frames, but if you do have hundreds or thousands of images captured, just remember that you might have to clean up the SD card once in a while to improve performance of the unit overall. We have autosave, and autosave, when we say yes, that will prevent the need to have to confirm every time that we want to save a frame when we capture it. I think that's probably a better mode. I'm going to go with autosave yes. Now that we've set the autosave mode, I can just take the unit like this and point it like that, press the trigger, and the image is saved, and I don't have to confirm for each image. So those are saved as I squeeze the trigger, and if I need to delete anything, so just to make it a little smoother, okay, let's start the whole process from the beginning. I go into playback, I select the image by pressing set once, I press set a second time, I go over to the trash can and I press delete and confirm, and that's how I would delete images one at a time. So that can be a little tedious. If you want to delete a large batch of images, you would go and do that by reformatting the SD card. And that would delete all of the images at once. The only thing I don't think I mentioned is the battery display. So the battery display is in the top right corner. One of the accessories for this Uni-T UTi260B thermal camera is something called a macro lens. And the macro lens allows us to get in for really tight detail on something that's small. Primarily, I'm got this macro lens for dealing with electronics, where we're dealing with very small surface mount components, and we're trying to look for temperature differences on a surface mount board. But of course, it can be used for looking at anything that we want to have a look at up close. That's what the macro lens is for. And this particular macro lens is made by Uni-T for this model. And it's in a little bit of a clamshell here. And the thing that I like about this macro lens is that it sort of snaps on to the front, or it's intended to snap on to the front, and so it's not permanently mounted to the front of the thermal camera. Let's now put the macro lens on the camera. And we need to make sure to line that up properly. There we go. And so that covers the whole area in the front. It also covers up those LED lights and the digital camera. And so when we have the macro lens fitted on top, we only will have access to the thermal camera. We won't be able to use the digital camera when we're using this macro lens. I've got this electronic load that I use for a lot of testing in the lab, and this has been running for a minute or two, so it's had a chance to warm up. And we're going to look right now. There's this power delivery circuit that you can see over here, and of course we want to see what we can see with the macro lens. So we see with the macro lens at this long distance, so that's a couple of inches above the board, everything is too fuzzy. We can't really make things out. But as we get down to the right distance, where the macro lens is at the right focal length, we really can see we have very good resolution here, very crisp picture because of the thermal activity that's going on the board. And so it's given us some very clear delineated lines. And the component that has warmed up is the voltage regulation chip on the power delivery board. So that's with the macro lens. The macro lens is currently about an inch above the surface of that little board. Now let's have a look at what happens when we take away the macro lens. So you can, like I said, you can see now we've got very good resolution. Although moving up, it gets blurry. Moving down, it also gets blurry. So there's a working range, if you will, for the macro lens. So I've popped off the macro lens. This is regular And now we can see the board. Of course, we can see there's a warm area, but we don't know what component it is that's warm. And as we get closer and closer, it just gets blurry. And that's about what the distance was when we had the macro lens on, about an inch above the board. We can see that there's a hot spot there, but we can't really tell what particular component that is. So the macro lens really does help when we're at this close distance, when we're trying to work with very small components. We can see that the macro lens is really a significant aid to helping us visualize what's going on at smaller sizes. In summary, all in all, this is a fantastic unit. I mean, it's handheld, the image display is just the right size, you can really see what's going on, it's got fantastic resolution. I mean, this wouldn't be great if you were using this to take snapshots of your family or anything, but in terms of figuring out what's going on from a thermal point of view, the resolution here is really fantastic. And having tried this around the house, and you can see the residual heat that's been left behind on the, if I move that out of the way, you can see the residual heat left behind on the mat. It really is a very sophisticated way of assessing temperature values and knowing what you're looking at when you're using those temperature values. I may have mentioned earlier in the video, I've used those infrared non-contact thermometers. They work, but it's a little bit hit and miss to know exactly what you're looking at. With this thermal imager, there, like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, even if it's not a very high resolution picture. This thermal imaging, this thermal camera really goes a great distance to helping localize with a very good degree of accuracy exactly where the hot spots or cool spots might be in an environment, in a setting. And I can see that this is going to come in handy for quite a lot of things. I do have a plan of one day being able to use this for micro soldering and troubleshooting. The other YouTube channels I've seen where people do that, they make it look easy. I don't think it's all that easy. I think it requires a huge amount of skill to do that. I will say that of all the devices that I've gotten over the last several years, this is one of the most fascinating things that I've been able to get and to make use of. And it really, it's kind of an unparalleled experience to be able to use a device like this with the level of sophistication that we see here. One item that's a little disappointing is that the package does not include a storage pouch for the thermal camera. This seems to be the trend these days for higher priced test equipment. Storage pouches and other accessories are considered to be extra cost items. Now, Uni-T does make a storage pouch for this model, and I've now placed that pouch on order. All right, well, that's everything for this unit. I hope this has been a helpful video for you. Please give the video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. I'd also appreciate it if you'd subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and until next time.